what I meant by the Biden administration was too stupid to be stupid. This administration, are they doing things in an effort to do something similar to what the previous administration has done to incentivize traders to move away so that we can have that reset, so that we can move to that next stage and point to the folks, the villains who pushed us there? And, you know, I'm not saying that's the case, but some of the actions you could argue by the previous or the current administration are silly in a greater context, in the respect that, you know, when you have the world reserve currency, you will always, always, always have a trade imbalance. That's Triffin's dilemma. The need for dollars globally is far greater than they can ever achieve just through trade. And so you have to export dollars. You have to have demand for dollars, which pushes the dollar up, and other currencies down, which makes manufacturing in those countries cheaper. That's why everything went that way to begin with. And so this is really the paradox: is are we better off having the reserve currency or not? Ask Vice President Vance, he'll tell you no. And so maybe, just maybe, that realization is coming into play that, well, we'll do things that will ultimately reshore the strategic manufacturing, which is a necessity. We have to do that, and it won't be pleasant. But do you want to do it and fall on the sword for our own mismanagement and terrible fiscal and monetary policy? Or are they doing these things like tariffs that are actually sanctions masquerading as tariffs, doing things like trying to balance the budget, trying to bring in DOGE, who finds $90 billion of waste, but that's 38 hours of spending by the government. That's nothing. And yet we're going to have another $2.5 trillion deficit. It's like the third largest, and I don't know how long. So the point of it is that our fiscal irresponsibility under this administration is growing. It's not falling. And so these things that we see, you have to question. And again, I'll go back to what I've said before. If you don't question, and I voted for President Trump, and I thank God he's here. I can only imagine how awful it would be under the Harris regime. But you have to wonder, you have to question everything, because if you don't, you've learned nothing over the last 4 years, where much of what we're learning was a lie. And that's not conspiracy, that's truth. And so, yeah, I wonder sometimes, is this administration continuing this thread of trying to lose ultimately the reserve status because it will make our country stronger, perhaps, after a reset? And that's the piece that people need to keep in mind is, yes, having the reserve currency has been an exorbitant privilege. We've pushed the indebtedness and the interest rate suppression so far that now it's a hindrance. And so you want to bring this stuff back. You want to bring back manufacturing. You want to, you're 60% of the country doesn't have a college degree. So what are we going to do? We need to bring that stuff back. Well, how do you do it? Well, you get into the greatest depression of all time. Well, do you find a villain? And that's the villain. I'm not saying that's what I believe. I'm just saying that a lot of the decisions that are being made seem to point in that direction. But whatever it is, I think that to expect this to be smooth sailing and green shoots moving forward over the next couple of years is insanity. I expect it to be very volatile in all aspects of investing, in all aspects of finance, not just precious metals, and maybe even further into political, geopolitical, societal, spiritual, the whole 9 yards. And at the end of any long-standing system, that's what you can expect to see. And I'd also say one thing. One of the things that you would expect to see towards the end of the dollar is greater use of the dollar, right? And that's what we are seeing. The dollar is being used much more. Why? Because good money they're buying assets, right? You store the good assets. You use the bad money, which is currency. It's like in with the old, that being treasuries and dollars, and in with the gold, in with cryptocurrencies. And that's what you're seeing, a lot of dollar use. But what is that dollar being used for? In my mind, at the highest level, it's being used to de-dollarize. And that's the confusing thing for people to understand. One of the things that I plan on talking about much more is how this works into the dollar milkshake theory, which we are seeing perhaps that starting to fray as well. And we won't talk about that tonight, but soon that's something that I do want to talk about, because I think this all plays into ultimately where we're heading, and that is to a monetary reset, which I do believe we are in the midst of right now. It's not that bang, it's the slow methodical, where the dollar goes out with a whimper, not a bang. And maybe that's where we're going right now. But yeah, the final chapter has not been written, not even close. Well, Italy and Germany are supposedly the second and third largest holders of gold in the world. And I think when you realize what Germany went through the first time, you're talking almost $250 billion worth combined, German and Italian gold. And why? Because it's a bigger symptom, or it's a symptom of a bigger problem, lack of trust. And that's the issue here, is that this is a trust-based system. When it was backed by gold, you didn't have to trust as much as you could redeem it for gold. That was the promise. Always return your dollars at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce if you were a foreign government. Well, at the end of World War II, after Europe had been ravaged by 2 world wars, it made sense to leave their gold here with the U.S. They would give us their gold, which was a non-interest bearing asset. We would pay them $35 per ounce. They could take that money, invest in our treasuries, earn a yield on it, and always exchange it back for $35 an ounce. That was a good system. The dollar was, in fact, as good as gold, and we had no inflation. And then we saw what happened since 1971. Gold was $35 an ounce at that point. It just touched 3,500 not too long ago. That's 100%. It's lost 99% of its value plus in my lifetime. I was born in 1970. Well, you add into it all of the issues regarding the current political environment, the lack of trust that was brought in, anointed in the seizing of $5 billion in Russian treasuries. It's not our job to be judge, jury, and executioner when you're talking about a global reserve currency, an issuer. And the world doesn't trust us anymore, including our allies. G7 members, they don't trust us anymore. And that's exactly what this is all about. And you're right, there's been north of 40 countries that have brought their gold back from both the Bank of England and the New York Fed, which these were the two areas, the two venues that provided liquidity, Western rule of law, safety, and gave direct access to the LBMA and the COMEX, the two fugazi, crooked, manipulated, and starting to show the issues of said manipulation through delivery requests. And I think they're like, yeah, maybe we should get while the getting is good. And we'll see how long it takes for them to return the gold this time. But quite frankly, I think they're late to doing this. And I think you would see more and more countries decide they would want to do the exact same thing. Quite frankly, I think anyone that would leave their gold at either place is silly and missing a bigger picture. Well, maybe before that happens, they change the rules. I don't know the answer to that question. In essence, the Hunt brothers should have, the environment that the Hunt brothers tried to expose and exploit is exactly what you see right now. Far more contracts than bars backing it. And they bought up all the contracts and stood for delivery. They changed the rules. They being the exchange, which is owned by the banks, which will protect themselves. The difference is the LBMA is not an exchange. It's an over-the-counter exchange. There isn't a central clearing authority. It's peer-to-peer in essence, me versus you. And if it breaks, there's no one there to step in per se, unless they get all of the members to do it. Whereas on COMEX, it's a different thing. It's a different animal. They can just, in essence, create a force majeure, shut it down, say no more deliveries, or do what they did in London when you saw the nickel problem. They just invalidate everything. We're getting to the point where that will happen, where whether it's outright default, it'll appear the exact same thing, and it will be settled in a manner where you would say, well, this was done to avoid a default. And, I think that if we wait for that moment to happen, you can see that they're doing all they can right now to keep that from happening. We get to that point, yeah, if the COMEX were to default, the entire precious metals complex breaks down. And I think that ultimately where you will see things change is you're beginning to see the development and the maturity of other exchanges in Dubai, in Shanghai. You'll see the BRICS development of the BRICS Metals Exchange. You'll see the Moscow Exchange. These exchanges now in Singapore, these exchanges that are coming up throughout Asia in particular, and the BRICS network, will be more of a cash and carry, reflective of real price settlement. And it's almost like these players are trying to exploit as much as they can through delivery using the Western system until the Western system breaks. And whether it breaks by outright delivery default on one of the two exchanges is debatable, but I think, in essence, whether we get to that point and see it or just realize it was inevitable before they came in and stepped in to protect themselves and changed the rules the way they did under the Hunt brothers, where they said you can be as short as you want, but only long a certain amount, like 1 million contracts or whatever it is. And then anything over that amount, they were forced to sell. And that's what drove the price down. Now that is manipulation of the exchange to protect itself and screwed the Hunt brothers. Well, something like that I would expect would happen before you'd see one of these big banks blow up. But in London, no. I think in London you could see a default by a very large institution and there will be no one in there to step in to rescue. It's a fair question. I can't really answer it definitively, but simply to say it seems like we're getting closer and closer to that moment.